Hello everybody, Dr. Dave here. Welcome to Tipsy Verbet. The purpose of our podcast is to help people make sense of life and create meaning. While what we talk about is based on our own experiences with addiction and helping other people who are overcoming addiction, the principles that we share are universal, and we think they'll be helpful to anyone who aims to better understand themselves and who wants to cultivate a life that's worth living, regardless of what their past experiences might be.
I'm Pierre, and I've been involved in the addiction community for over a decade. This podcast is independent of any other work we do, and we're in no way affiliated with anyone else. We hope that the spirit that comes across in our conversations is one of compassion, and that you find it helpful. Hello, and welcome to the podcast. I'm here with my good friend David.
Hello, Pierre.
What are we going to talk about today?
Today, let's talk about emotions. Extremely important when we talk about a life that's worth living. One of the things that we're going to have to identify and to learn to manage is our response to our emotions. And very often we don't realize actually that the way we identify emotions and what informs our response to emotion is learned. And it starts off in infancy, in early childhood, later childhood, and as we grow up into adolescence and to early adulthood. And through adulthood, we learn to identify emotions. We should learn to identify emotions. And the reason that that's so important is because we don't actually experience the emotions, right? We experience the feeling associated with the emotion, which when I talk about feelings, I mean thoughts and sensations that go with an emotion. So that's what we respond to, right? We respond to a feeling, and the reason that's so important is because that feeling influences how we present ourselves to the world in three particular important ways. First of all, it determines what we pay attention to. That's important, right? Because what you pay attention to determines what you don't pay attention to. And what you pay attention to informs your interaction with the world. It informs how you perceive the world around you. The second thing, the way we respond to a feeling, is it changes the way we look. So when I experience, if I'm angry, you can see I'm angry, right? I don't look the same when I'm angry as when I'm happy. I don't look the same when I'm afraid as when I'm in love, for example. I might, but you know what I mean.
Sure.
And that's really important because the way we look, which is not just our facial expression, it's the entire way we hold our body, our posture. It's the gestures that we use. It even influences the way we present our voice to the world, our tone of voice, and how fast we speak. And there's an enormous component of communication. In fact, that's actually much more important than what I actually say to you.
Non-verbal.
Yes. So I can say, I love you. You're probably going to run a mile. You know what I mean. I'm just saying you can say things in such a way that it completely dismisses what you've actually said.
Yeah, and alters the perception of the other person about what's happening.
Absolutely right. So the way we look, the way we speak, the gestures we use, our posture, very importantly our facial expression, is a very powerful way of communication. And of course all of that is influenced by the way we feel. The third thing that a feeling will do is influence the way we behave. All of those things, what we pay attention to, how we communicate non-verbally, and how we behave, and what we say, of course, influences what happens next. And so our response to a feeling determines what will happen after that. So being able to identify feelings and the emotions behind them is incredibly important. And it's the difference between living a lovely, beautiful, functional life and a life of fear and
chaos.
That's the word. That's the word, right? Because we don't live a life of fate. Nothing happens for a reason. We live a life of consequences of our responses to our feelings. We live a life essentially of consequences of our own behavior. But that behavior is influenced very strongly too by what we look like, how we communicate. And that in itself is separate, and what we pay attention to. All of those are responses to feelings. Now, if you have grown up in an environment where your feelings were not validated, where you had to adapt your behavior and your responses to situations which were not aligned with what your emotions told you was really happening. So, for example, if you're always feeling you have to adapt yourself to please an adult or to achieve a specific outcome, if your emotions were, if you tell a boy, for example, that men don't cry, when he grows up and he feels anxiety or he feels sadness, or he will experience anger. And so what's happening is his interpretation of the emotion is incorrect, but it's based in his past experience. So very often that past experience, you've had to adapt to a particular situation to keep you safe. So what happens is that we don't grow up learning to identify the actual emotion that is behind the feeling.
Right.
So one of the things that happens with us in addiction too is we stop feeling altogether. You know, many of us have dysfunctional ways of thinking before we go into addiction. Well, probably all of us, right? Because others wouldn't go into addiction if we didn't have trouble making sense of the world.
For me, everything felt the same. It was just anxiety and depression were probably underlying, and everything was linked to that.
Yes.
Because...
And then you start drinking, and then everything does feel the same.
Yeah.
And in fact, anything that takes us out of that sameness, any strong emotions that don't feel nice. So we refer to those as having a negative valency. When we say valency, what it feels like. Anything that takes us out of the anger, resentment, sadness, anxiety, fear, that takes us out of this non-feeling state. But also any emotion that has a positive valency that feels good, so happiness, excitement. For me, one of the biggest triggers of wanting to drink is relief. So anything that takes us out of this non-feeling state, this sort of like operating on a low level, for want of a better word, I was going to say comfort zone, but it's not a comfort zone, it's a bearable zone. Anything that takes us out of that, whether it feels good or whether it feels bad, is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because it's very difficult for us to make sense of it. And so we often hear people say, you know, when I'm miserable, I'm okay, you know, because I recognize I'm miserable and I'm on my guard.
I'm vigilant.
I'm vigilant against going back to drinking, but it's when I'm happy that I relapse, you know. It's when I feel relief that I relapse because I let my guard down. And what we don't realize is that anything that takes us out of that just non-feeling state that you're describing, which is why I went to drink in the first place, right? Because I felt too uncomfortable when I felt. Anything that takes us out of that makes me want to drink again to correct that state, to correct those uncomfortable feelings. So let's draw a quick picture here to have a look at where emotions arise from and why they're so important, right? So when an event happens, the brain can respond to that event. But one of the ways it responds is to predict what's going to happen next. It doesn't respond quickly enough to respond to everything that's happening around it. So much of the way it responds, and it can respond in a number of different ways, but it can respond by thoughts and emotions. But because those are very, very much influenced by prediction, it's important to recognize where predictions come from. Now, if you're going to predict that something's going to happen, you need some sort of reference to predict from, right? So when an event happens, the prediction arises from the past, from past experiences. And so different people with different past experiences will make different predictions, and that's why different people, one of the reasons why different people respond to different situations. So a very good example, of course, is people who've been in a war situation will respond very differently if they're walking down the street and a car backfires to somebody who lives in the city and is used to that all the time, because their past experiences have been completely different. And so what their brain predicts will happen next is very different. And so, of course, if we have a look at what our past experiences, of course, is our childhood is very, very, very important. And one of the things that's important in our childhood is that we learn to feel. We learn to feel. You were saying just now that you started using nuptials. What do you call nuptials? What do you call victuals? I don't know. You started using substances because your feelings were uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It was difficult to feel. And what substances do, alcohol does, is it dampens down feeling. I often think that one of the best definitions of recovering from addiction actually is learning to feel again. Learning to feel without having to chemically alter those emotions.
And without falling apart.
Yes, to make them bearable, yeah. And as you say, the definition of mental health is to be the ability to face every day without falling apart. Right? That doesn't mean that you won't feel strong emotions or that you won't have difficulties, but it means that you will, with the development of a sense of equanimity, as we call it, right? The sense that things will be okay because I can handle whatever comes my way, no matter what I feel about it.
Yeah.
So my childhood is very important. When you go through childhood, a healthy childhood, your emotions will be validated. Your parents will say to you, "Oh, come on, I understand why you're sad. Oh, come on, let's try again." You know, that sort of thing. And as opposed to, boys don't cry. Get up and, laugh it off or whatever it might be. So during a healthy childhood, you learn that I am entitled to my emotions. I can learn about my emotions. And what I feel is because I'm a human being and situations have different feelings. And so I grow up and I recognize the different feelings that are associated with different situations. If my emotions are not validated and I'm not allowed to feel, or I'm not allowed to express the way I feel, then I grow up thinking that the way I feel is wrong. So I don't identify my emotions, and it becomes very difficult later on. And sometimes those strong emotions. So we sometimes people talk to us and they tell us they have anger issues. What they're actually expressing is that when things happen, they feel a very strong sense of anger. And usually what they're describing when they say they've got anger issues, they're actually not describing the feeling at all, they're describing the behavior that comes next, aren't they? That they feel this strong emotion and they don't have time to make sense of it before they automatically react to it. And so very often this results in shouting or even violence. And of course it's very destructive on relationships. What's important to recognize is there's so much going on. As somebody who says they've got anger issues, right, when they're describing a natural behavior, they're really describing this inability to identify and react appropriately to a very strong emotion. So it may be that, as we said earlier, if you tell a boy that men don't cry, when he feels sadness, he experiences a feeling of anger, the thoughts and the feelings that go associated with anger. But it's completely inappropriate to the actual emotion. And so his response to an event which has created that emotion is completely inappropriate. It may be that at one time that response was appropriate. When he was a younger person or a child, it may have actually been a protective. It may not have been, but it may have been a protective way to respond. And what's happening now is, although it served some purpose at some earlier stage in his life, it's no longer helpful. In fact, in the opposite, it's actually making his life very chaotic and dysfunctional and damaging relationships and things like that.
Yeah.
So we talk about in addiction, you often hear people talk about character defects. Yeah? And when they're talking about character defects, they're talking about thoughts and behaviors which are not helpful, maybe even destructive. It's an appalling term to apply to anybody, because you're not defective. You're not a defective human being. You are a human being who has suffered from addiction, right? Nobody goes to addiction because it's fun, you know? You go to addiction to cope with a life that is generally we have trouble coping with, as you say, to dampen down these feelings. And so a lot of these behaviors and thoughts, which now are referred to as character defects, are actually quite the opposite. They're behaviors and thoughts that once served a purpose. They were adaptive. They helped us to survive. Sometimes surviving meant not feeling. And so far from being character defects, they're actually character adaptations. The problem is that as you grow up and you move into a life where you're responsible for yourself and for other people, they're not helpful anymore. And they're no longer serving a purpose. And so they need addressing, but it's important to recognize that you don't have them just because you're a defective person. You have them because you adapted to difficult situations. But it's important to recognize them and that they're not serving a purpose anymore. So we have a look at other things that influence the way the brain predicts. Of course, it's cultural and societal influences and our own biases and prejudices, right? The way it's not, people are encouraged these days to not have biases and prejudices, but if you didn't have biases and prejudices, you'd be dead, right? You have to make assessments about things all the time, and those are also based in past experiences. The community that we align to is very important, right? If you spend your time with people who are angry and fearful, you will start to develop angry and fearful tendencies yourself, which of course will very strongly influence the way you interpret events, as opposed to if you spent your time with optimistic and happy people. So the community that you spend time with is extremely important. The way that your body feels, so your physiological state, right, your body state. So for example, if you're cold, or you're hungry, or you're tired, or you're not feeling well, or you're lonely, or you're feeling other emotions like anger or fear at the time you experience this event, all of those things will influence how the brain predicts how it should respond to this event. And so it responds in different ways, but very importantly, it creates emotions to tell your body what it needs. And you experience those thoughts and those emotions as a feeling. And when I say feelings, I mean the thoughts and the bodily sensations. So did we describe what, like anxiety, did we do that already?
No, that's a good place to start.
So let's say I'm going into a situation that's unfamiliar to me. A healthy brain will create the emotion of anxiety, and I will feel that emotion of anxiety as thoughts and feelings. So the thoughts may be, watch out, be careful, this is new to you, don't know what's going to happen, be vigilant. It may turn my attention to specific places. And then I will feel a particular way. I'll feel that feeling that's associated with anxiety, this sort of like emptiness in the chest. My sympathetic nervous system will kick in, right, prepares me for fright and flight.
Sweaty palms,
sweaty
that's
palms,
a big one for me.
Yeah. My muscles may feel tighter, right?
Heart faster.
My heartbeat for my pupils dilate and all of this sort of stuff. So it's a completely different feeling to what would accompany, for example, the emotion of love. And of course there can be variations in this, right? Because emotions are not just black and white, they are graded. So I can have mild annoyance, or I can be angry, or I can be absolutely furious. All of these are different nuances on what we would call the same emotion, anger, but they feel completely different. And I will respond to them completely differently. So if we have a look at them, we take it from that context. Having words to describe this feeling is so important, because just being able to name a feeling can be incredibly therapeutic. If I've grown up in an environment where I've never developed the ability to identify the feeling that I'm feeling, the starting point is to be able to label it. Yeah. Because then I can see whether I'm responding appropriately.
Right.
What happens once I've had a feeling, of course, is that feeling often generates secondary feelings. So what I mean by that is that you make me angry, let's say. Or I respond to you in an angry way. You do something that makes me feel angry. I may be very disappointed in you that you've made me feel angry. I may be sad that you've made me feel angry. I may be surprised that you've made me feel angry because I didn't expect you to. Or I may have expected you to make me feel angry, and because I expected to feel angry and I feel angry, maybe that anger starts to dissipate a little bit. Alternatively, I may be very angry with you that you've made me feel angry, so my secondary feeling is anger. So one feeling leads to another. And there may be other feelings that come from those feelings. And so often one of the things that happens is our feelings start to change or to merge into new feelings. But the important thing to recognize that comes with that is what happens next. And we mentioned what those things may be. So the first thing is that the feeling turns my attention to specific things in the environment. It turns my attention to how I feel, turns my attention to different people, turns my attention to different senses. Very importantly, if I'm paying attention to something, it means I'm not paying attention to something else. And what I pay attention to frames my perception of reality. So it changes the way I perceive the world. The second thing it does is it changes the way I present myself to the world. So we said it changes my facial expressions. It changes the tone of my voice. It changes my gestures. It changes my posture. And that's very important, because that communicates something to the people around me. Thirdly, it changes the way I respond in a behavioral sense. It changes what I do next. Now, the important thing to recognize is that all of these things determine how I respond in its entirety and what happens next. So it has consequences. So what are we saying here? What we're saying here, if I'm going to respond appropriately to an event, then it is absolutely vital that I'm able to identify the feelings that I'm feeling. If I can identify the feelings that I'm feeling, then I can identify the emotion that lies behind that feeling, then I can ask myself, is this an appropriate way to respond to the situation or not? One of the things that happens, another way to respond to anxiety, for example, if I have grown up and I have grown up in such a way that I don't have a strong sense of self-worth, if I don't feel like I'm capable of responding to things, if maybe I've grown up in an environment where whenever I expressed an opinion I was told I was stupid, or when I said to my caregivers that this is the way I want to do something and it's not the way they would have done it, then again they chastise me for doing that and they make me do it the way they would have done it. And I grow up with this learned helplessness that I'm not able to help myself. I continually need validation from other people, or validation that the way I would do things or my opinion is correct. Then I may when I experience things like anxiety, which will probably become my main go-to emotion, right? Because I don't trust myself, then I will avoid things. And so this becomes my standard response. I don't even get down to these sorts of things. That all I do is just to not put myself in situations where I'm going to experience this at all. And of course, that's incredibly restrictive.
Not where you're not going to experience them, where you think you're not going to experience it, and therefore don't do it and deny yourself the opportunity to
Yeah, well put.
truly live.
Well put, because it's actually not even a expression of what's real. It's an expression of what's in my head.
Yes, it's not reality.
Which I suppose in my head, for me, it's reality.
How objective reality, is that a better way to put it? Or
Yes, right. So it's, yes, right.
But
Well,
it's
is there such a thing as subjective reality?
but it's false. Is the point
Yes.
that I'm making? It's false because, and it's sad.
Coming back to what we were saying, that it's based in a previous protective behavior, a previous protective response.
Yeah.
It's based in thoughts and actions which were at one time served me. They protected me. But they're not helpful anymore. Quite the opposite. They are destructive.
Especially if it's extreme behavior.
In a healthy person, the consequences of all of this, if the consequences were what I expected, so let's say they were correct, then it will reinforce this prediction. If the consequences are not what I expected, then it will update this prediction. Notice also that these consequences become past experiences, right? So they may be inconsequential, but they may be important enough to inform future predictions. I want to notice what happens in an addicted brain, because one of the things that we're predicting all the time is that having a drink will make me feel better, right? So I get these thoughts, very powerful thoughts. A drink would be nice right now. That thought on its own is enough. So we did a podcast on what's happening in the addicted brain. I would refer people back to that. That thought on its own is enough to lock you into having to have a drink, because it feeds into parts of the brain that are powerfully involved in learning, powerfully turn my attention to what my body needs, and powerfully motivates me to seek that out. That's why you only have to think about having a drink and you're already locked in. It's why only a non-addict would say to an addict, just don't have one more, right? Or take your mind off it, go and watch a movie, right? It's too late. Once you think about it, you're locked in. We call that incentive salience. It's incredibly powerful. It's the reason why when you're addicted, you can't leave it alone. Yeah. So in an addicted brain, when I don't feel better, even though I've predicted that I will, and the brain will always predict you'll feel better because it's learned that this is how I cope. That learning is so powerful. It will predict I feel better even when I know I won't. Now, doesn't that sound complicated? But the brain will predict I feel better even though I won't, because these are different parts of the brain. Two very different parts of the brain who work together. And we said this, right? This part of the brain says here, it predicts that I'll feel better. It says, I want to drink. I'll feel better. This part of the brain here says, actually, I don't think I'll feel better. My life's falling apart. I don't want to drink. Now I've got these two opposing thoughts in my head at the same time. I don't want to drink, but I do want to drink. Or I don't want to stop, but I do want to stop. And the brain will make sense of that by telling me that I can't stop. So it's important to recognize, if you feel like you can't stop, it's not just because you used this drunk, it's because that's how the human brain works. Yeah? It doesn't mean you can't stop, but it's very understandable if you might feel like that, especially if you've tried in the past and not been successful. Or you're afraid that if you try and stop and you won't be successful this time, then other people will judge you and dismiss you, and So there's all sorts of reasons why you might feel you can't stop, because it's just safer to feel like I can't stop.
I didn't think I'd be able to have fun. That was one of the big things that kept me there.
Which is a different thought, right? What's the point in stopping?
Yeah.
Yeah. But they all feed, if you notice, the converging point of all of these thoughts is that I will continue.
Right.
And of course, all the other thoughts, I can't stop, I'm useless, can't do anything right, everything's hopeless, and if everything's hopeless, then I might as well.
Pick up a drink.
Where every addict's brain wants them to be is a state of hopelessness. Because if everything's hopeless, then I might as well drink.
Yeah.
So what's happening in an addicted brain? If I predict I'll feel better, but I don't, well, what it should do, it should update the prediction. But it doesn't. It doesn't.
We have a term for this.
Do we?
Dopamine.
Oh, yes, of course, dopamine reward prediction error. So it really predicts I'm going to have a reward, I'm going to feel better.
Yeah.
A reward could be good or bad, by the way. It's just an outcome of an event.
Right.
But it's important to recognize that, right? Because incentive salience is why you can't leave it alone. Dopamine reward prediction error is why you can't stop when you start. Because the prediction that you, in this case, the prediction that you will feel better, is wrong. And in a healthy brain, you'd update the prediction. But in an addicted brain, you don't. Instead of saying, hey, change your prediction, stop, it says, try harder, do it again, try harder.
This time will be different.
This time will be different, yeah. So, you know, it's so important to understand that something's happening in the brain of all of us who are locked in, who become dependent on substances, who become dependent on alcohol, and all of these feelings that I can't stop, that life won't be fun, they are not reasons why we cannot become independent. They are reasons why we need to seek help and community to support us in becoming independent. They're reasons why it's so difficult by ourselves, which is how we differentiate between a real addict and somebody who's just a heavy user, right? Some people can stop by themselves, and good for them. But for many of us, and this is the whole point of this podcast, right, is for people who cannot. But there's a community, in a community who will support you, it becomes easier to do so.
Yeah.
And to understand, like as we say, you know, if you want to learn to do something, you've got to know what to do, believe you can do it, and believe it's worth it. How do you believe you can do it and believe it's worth it?
By doing it.
By experiencing it.
They come afterwards sometimes.
They come afterwards, and the community will support you and help you in that. Yeah. So these feelings. So what are we saying here? So one of the things we need to do is to help us to identify our feelings. And so just very basically, right, 2 simple questions. What am I thinking? What am I feeling? Just ask myself that, but I must answer those questions, right? Will start to give me a sense as to what my body feels like and what I'm thinking. And when I combine that with especially mindfulness exercises, right, especially mindful walking, mindful movement, mindful walking, paying attention to your movement, paying attention to your walking, will start to teach you what your body feels like again. And it will help you to start slowly identifying some of these feelings and emotions. Meditation can be very helpful as well. I often think that if we're going to meditate, then it's better done with other people as well, who can help and guide you through this, because it can be very difficult, especially for people who've had traumatic pasts. Meditation can be extremely uncomfortable and triggering. Yeah. And so you can have the opposite effect sometimes of what the effect you're.
Yeah, one of the podcasts we're going to do in the future is talking more broadly about what meditation is. I think sometimes there's a bit of a connotation or a stigma as to what it is, but...
And a misunderstanding, yeah.
Yeah, paying attention on purpose.
Yes. And so that's exactly it, right? Paying attention on purpose. So when we did the podcast on attention, we briefly spoke about that and some exercises that one could do.
Very much,
to do that.
very helpful exercises.
So if I can ask myself, what am I feeling? What does it feel like? Is it appropriate to the situation? And start to get a sense. Other people, especially people, for example, who express these things like anger issues, requires additional help, right? It requires additional help. And for some of those people, it requires a lot of additional help. So I'm not trying to minimalize this and make this sound trite and silly and too easy. For many of us, it is a matter of, for the first time in our life, turning our attention to the way we feel. And it may be sometimes that's best done in the community and with a friend, with a mentor.
With a therapist, maybe.
And with a therapist. I'm trying to stay away from that because I'm not that there's wrong with a therapist, but the point is, for many of us, a good friend is as good as a therapist. A good trusted friend, somebody to talk to. Right? And the abstinence community will also help to provide people like that. For many people, though, therapy is always helpful if you've got a good therapist. If you haven't got a good therapist, it can be worse then. It's not helpful, I think. Right? So therapy may be very helpful. But for a lot of us, it's not necessary, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. A nice thing about being part of that community is that they'll be honest with you and be able to assist you in arriving at the conclusion of whether that therapy with a professional is necessary or
Yes.
not, like you said.
Yes.
And that's very helpful.
Yes.
Yeah.
So lastly, I want to talk about two specific emotional issues. The first one is the one where we get asked about this a lot. The actual psychological term for it is catastrophizing. I turn everything into a catastrophe. I'm always worried that the worst will happen. Sometimes, actually, what I'm really doing in my mind is willing the worst to happen. It's like there was a guy who told us he was a compulsive gambler, and to get to work he had to drive past the casino. So this was a catastrophe, and he doesn't know what can I possibly do about that. We thought the answer was rather obvious. But, what was he really saying? What he was really saying was, I want to go back to gambling. This is my excuse to do it, right? For those of you who are watching who don't know what the obvious answer is to change your route to work. Yeah? And to join a community that will support you. But there are a couple of things that we can do when we catastrophize, right? Because a lot of people think, I'm always thinking that the worst is going to happen, and I live with this constant form of anxiety. So there are a couple of things. All of these involve writing. Writing is very important. It's very therapeutic. It uses different parts of our brain to what we use when we think and when we speak. It's very creative. And most importantly, there's a record of it when we've done it. And it's for you. No one else has to read it, right? It doesn't matter how well you write. But once it's written, it distances you from it. You can read it again and you can see it more objectively and make sense of it. The other thing about when you write, your thoughts flow. And so, we've said this so many times that the poet David Whyte says, poetry is overhearing my mind saying things that I didn't know I knew. What he's describing actually is the writing process. When I write, I can make sense of things that I never thought I could make sense of because things I didn't know I knew come out onto the page. And when I talk about writing, I mean writing on paper with a pen, right? Not typing. It's not the same thing at all. The actual physical act of writing. So first of all, write down what I'm afraid will happen. What is the worst that can happen? Then write down what is the likelihood of the worst happening. Then write down what would I do if the worst happened. When we do another season of this, we've got to straighten the book, right? That's terrible. What would I do if the book was straightened? I'd probably write better. What would I do if the worst happened? These are lovely questions, right? Because what happens is I can see that very often the likelihood of the worst happening, when I apply my mind to it, is very small. It's unlikely that it happened. I can add to this here is, the likelihood of it's often very small. And once I've written this, what would I do if the worst happened, I can see that even if the worst happened, I have sort of some plan of action. There would be some course of action I can take, right? And often when I see this, I see that it's like Albert Ellis used to call this catastrophizing. He used the word awfulizing. Wouldn't it be awful if my girlfriend dumped me? Well, what's the likelihood of my girlfriend dumping me? Well, when I ask that question, another lovely question comes to mind is, well, that's up to me, isn't it? Partly up to me anyway. So here's a fourth question. What can I do to prevent it? to prevent the worst happening? What steps can I take to prevent the worst happening? And I can also write down reasons why it won't happen. So let's take these questions again. It won't happen, yeah. What's the worst that can happen? Write it down. I can see what my fear is. I can see my fear. This is very important, because we'll see why that's so important coming. I want to see what the fear is. I want to put it on paper, because even sometimes just doing that and distancing me objectively says, well, that's irrational. It's an irrational fear. It is unlikely. The likelihood of it happening is small. What would I do if it happened? Well, even if it happened, and this is the way Albert Ellis described it, he said, it wouldn't be awful. So I'm saying it would be awful if my girlfriend left me. Well, even if she left me, there would probably be reasons why she left me. And it wouldn't be awful. I could find another girlfriend, right? Or I could go and talk to her and, try and put things right, if that was the best course of action to take. What would I do if the worst happened, right? This is assuming that you're not a psychopathic stalker and you go, okay, that's another issue, another podcast all by itself. What can I do to prevent it? Three things I can do that I can prevent it, so make the likelihood of it happening even smaller. And there are often reasons why the worst that I'm fearing won't happen. The last thing to write down here is what actually happened. So this is after the event. And this is really important, because when you write down what actually happened and you've written down the worst that you fear could happen, you can compare the two. And it's very important not only to see what happened, but it's also really important to see what didn't happen. And when I perform this exercise repeatedly, I start to learn that even if in my head I still continue to do these things, I start to recognize that it's actually irrational fear. So sometimes, I think sometimes some of these things are deep inside of us, and I'm not one of these people that always believes that therapy and talking to people can take stuff away. I sometimes think that especially stuff that's deeply ingrained in us, right, the beliefs about ourselves, our beliefs about what could happen to us, are deeply ingrained. What your parents, your caregivers say to you before the age of 7 becomes that little voice in your head. Sometimes it's very difficult to change. And so I think sometimes it's an unreal expectation that therapy and embarking on therapeutic exercises is going to take this away. It doesn't. And it's okay. Sometimes it's not supposed to. Sometimes that is part of you. It's what makes you have something unique to offer very often.
Well, and it awakens me to the fact that, perhaps what I'm holding as firm belief needs to be examined more thoroughly.
So it may actually change you from somebody who is fearful into somebody who has fearful thoughts but is now a deep thinker, right, and can make sense of things. And so that's what I think good therapy does, and good interactions with community does. It helps to give you new perspectives on things. Yeah. And so it's not about changing irrational beliefs or fears necessarily. It's lovely if you can, but it's not. It's about changing your relationship to them. So for example, one of the things I've always struggled with in my life is low self-esteem, sort of feeling that, for want of a better word, that I'm an idiot. That's never really left me, but I have no evidence that I'm an idiot, and I have lots of evidence that I am helpful to people actually, and so despite the fact that those feelings have never gone away, my relationship to those thoughts are completely different. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and I think it's reinforced by the company you keep.
Of course, yes.
One of the beautiful things that you taught me was the lovely question, what would I say to a friend?
Yeah.
What would I say to a friend?
Which brings us back to the virtue list again, right? Full circle, yeah.
Love it.
How would a loving person behave? Somebody had my best interests at heart. So I think that, these sorts of questions are not necessarily going to take your fearful thoughts away. What it will help you to do is to change your relationships to your fearful thoughts that shows you that I do have these fearful thoughts occasionally, and it's okay. It's me, it's okay. It's not something that necessarily has to be changed. But when I have these fearful thoughts, let me apply some rational thinking to it. And, it's the same when we treat people with depression and anxiety. The treatment can't always take away all those symptoms. People expect to feel my depression is going to completely go away. Partly it's to help people learn to live with the residual symptoms that remain. One of the big symptoms of addiction we talk about a lot, right, is anhedonia. This sense that I'm not going to feel pleasure, therefore it's not really worthwhile doing anything. And in fact, sometimes when I do things that used to give me pleasure, I don't get pleasure from them anymore. So there's a lot going on there. There's different aspects here. One is not feeling pleasure from doing things, and the other is not anticipating that I'll feel pleasure and therefore feeling apathetic, that I don't want to do anything.
Yeah.
And the treatment for that is not going to take those things away. The problem, well, not the problem, but the one of aspect about anhedonia, unlike other psychological symptoms of addiction, is anhedonia often remains, sometimes even for life, in people who, partly because it was very likely there, and one of the reasons why you became an addict in the first place, because it was a consequence of a troubled past or a difficult past or a difficult relationship with the world, whatever that might have been. The treatment for anhedonia is not to make the anhedonia go away. It's to change your relationship to the anhedonia. Okay, I know that I'm not going to look forward to doing this thing, but I will do it anyway. And if that's difficult for me, then I will cultivate around me a community of people who will support me in doing it and hold me accountable to doing it. And then when I do things, sometimes I notice actually, hey, even though I didn't imagine I was going to enjoy it, I do enjoy it. But more importantly than that, when I do things, something else comes from the doing of the thing. There's a consequence of doing of the thing. Maybe I hate playing cricket, but I say I'll go and play cricket. And I meet somebody there and I hate playing it while I'm playing it, by the way. But I meet someone there just motor racing. They say, hey, Dave, come to the track next week. Maybe you're going to love motor racing. And I find something brand new, and one thing leads to another. And you and I are both sitting here because that's happened to us along the way, right?
Absolutely.
Lastly, I just want to mention this sense of anxiety that a lot of people express, is that I don't feel like I fit in. Just to say that that's the nature of the human condition. It's not something that's unique to people who are depressed or anxious. It's not something unique to people who are addicts, although many, many addicts say that I never felt like I fitted in, and as soon as I had a drink, I felt like I fitted in. What they're expressing is, as soon as I had a drink, I stopped being authentically me. And I conformed to my expectations of what I thought a group of people or a person wanted of me, even though I didn't know what that was. And I became something that wasn't me. And at that very point, I abandoned myself, and I can never be truly loved. And I will never fit in ever again, because I don't allow myself to. And so the treatment for not feeling like I fit in is to recognize that people don't fit in. Partly, it's to remind you that you do have something unique to offer. You're not like everybody else. And your job in life is not to fit in. Your job in life is to flourish. And you will flourish by offering to the world your uniqueness. And paradoxically, when you embrace your uniqueness and you allow yourself to be vulnerable in sharing of yourself to other people, you will feel like you fit in, because now you can recognize your contribution.
Absolutely, that was beautifully put. And a big part of that, and I think that also comes as part of this, is finding the right communities where it's okay to be you. It's okay to be you.
Lastly, yes, It's always okay to be you, I think.
Yes, agreed.
As long as you're adaptable, because the you present to the world can be authentic but appropriate under different circumstances.
Yeah.
Lastly, this is important to recognize too, it comes back to what you said just now with regard to community. One of the things that separates me from other people is what's going on in my head. We all have thoughts and expectations from life which we feel uncomfortable sharing with other people. What's important to realize and recognize is that those thoughts and expectations deserve to be shared, because if they are unshared, they only separate us more. But they need to be shared with the right people.
Yeah.
People we trust. Yeah. People
that we don't fear judgment from.
Yes.
Yeah.
And who will support us and who want the best for us. And we find those people in the communities that we seek out. And that's why we need to do this authentic list. What do I want from my life? Right? What are the communities who will support me in doing all of those things? The abstinence community must be one of them, because that is the community who will support you in your journey of not drinking, even in the face of wanting to. But the other communities are important. The communities of all your hobbies you want to do, your work community, your family community.
Yeah, I think that's very, very well put. What a lovely way to end the season. It's such a message of hope. And hope is definitely the theme of all of the episodes that we've presented so far. Thank you. We appreciate the privilege of being able to have delivered this. It's taken 3 years of intense work. We're very proud of what we've put together, I am. And we truly, truly hope that it can be of benefit to all. As usual, we'll leave some information down in the bio below. But thank you for joining us. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
And we'll see you in the next season.
Good, everybody. Bye.
Bye.